So what is it in reality? In reality, the Ukrainian nation is probably dead. Millions and millions and millions of Ukrainians have left the country. They will never go back. The birth rate, which was already low, has now gone through the floor. Now we have the Procurator General who finally admitted in public that the Ukrainians have lost 500,000 soldiers on the battlefield. Gosh, what a surprise. What has General Kuyat said? What have I said? What have others said who have any sense of reality? Ukraine is being destroyed.
I'm going to tell you the truth, says Vanya, a Ukrainian soldier serving in a reconnaissance unit, fighting along Marines in the east bank of the Dnipro River in southern Ukraine. The situation is deplorable.
We're fucked.
Financial Times reports that Ukrainian troops are suffering heavy casualties here, laments Vanya, declining to give specifics, citing military secrecy. The Russians, he adds, have an advantage of at least 4 to 5 soldiers to every 1 Ukrainian. Part of the problem is logistical, because the Ukrainians must cross the river in small vessels to remain undetected and more nimble, and they are not able to transport larger, more deadly weapons. The end goal was to create a position from which the Ukrainian army could launch new attacks deeper into Russian-controlled territory. That is looking less likely day by day. Asked whether Ukraine can hold its base there long term, Vanya was blunt. Of course not, he says. The fact is, the Marine Corps was unable to maintain the pace of the offensive and for sure lost the initiative a long time ago. Vanya now expects the troops to fall back to defensive positions on the Dnipro's west bank or risk suffering heavy losses among its strongest units. But to what extent it should adopt a more secure defensive position in anticipation of a difficult third year of the war is no longer a question just for those stationed on the Dnipro River, but for Ukraine's entire military and its commander-in-chief. On the second anniversary of Russia's invasion, being on February 24th of 2024, Financial Times described Ukraine's military prospects as appearing to be dimming. It has abandoned hopes of a swift victory and is instead girding itself for a drawn-out war. One Western official working on Ukraine policy believes, and I quote, "There is little prospect of an operational breakthrough by either side in 2024. This reality is now acknowledged in Kiev, where President Zelensky declared in December last year that a new phase has set in after the counteroffensive failed to recapture large areas of the south as planned.
Українці, українки, щойно провів у Запоріжжі 2 важливі наради та усіма, хто відповідає за оборону тут, і саме на Запоріжжі, щодо фортифікації на всіх основних напрямках, де потрібно посилитись, прискоритись будівництвом споруд.
He has now ordered his army to build new fortifications along key segments of its 1,000-kilometer front line, signaling a shift from an offensive to a defensive posture. Hence the term active defense, which according to Western officials means holding defensive lines but probing for weak spots to exploit, coupled with long-range airstrikes which are aimed at allowing Ukraine to build out its forces this year and prepare for 2025, when hopefully a new counteroffensive would have a better chance. But to achieve this objective, Ukraine has to grapple with the uncertainty surrounding Western military assistance, which Ukraine is burning through. Financial Times also says that there are open questions about the West's resolve and whether it could continue backing Ukraine in its fight, and if so, to what extent.
We have given now Ukraine the last security assistance package that we have funds to support right before New Year's, right after Christmas.
I have asked the White House since the day that I was handed the gavel as Speaker for clarity we need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient. What the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed.
In this chart, we see a comparison of Ukraine and Russia's military forces. And note that Ukraine has an estimated 688,000 active military personnel, while Russia has almost 1.2 million. And now it seems Ukraine is finally realizing that their months of costly offensives, both in the fall of 2022 and the summer of 2023, are simply no longer sustainable. And now they must hope that they can survive 2024 with low ammo and being on the defensive. Russia, however, has always seemed far more alive to the usefulness of an active defense strategy in this war. Lieutenant General Yuri Stavitsky, head of the Russian engineering force, on January 18th this year, told a newspaper that the 120-kilometer deep defensive system has, and I quote, helped the Russian army increase its survival rate by 5 to 6 times. And here are some numbers. According to a Vietnamese newspaper, Russia has built more than 3,600 kilometers of trenches, 150,000 shelters, more than 45,000 bunkers, and 12,000 reinforced concrete works. In total, more than 400 defensive zones has been built in 8 months. In a New York Times interview during a press conference on January 18th, Zelensky said that the Ukrainian army is short of drones and shells, and according to him, the lack of ammunition is hindering Ukraine's efforts to achieve certain goals. He also admitted that the needs of the Ukrainian army are not easy, as the output of all companies producing 155mm caliber artillery shells is not enough to supply the artillery war in Ukraine.
This factory in Pennsylvania is making Ukraine's most important ammunition. 155mm rounds are basically giant bullets used in artillery guns. And today, demand is so high that it's making 11,000 of them every month. Ukraine may be firing more than half of that each day.
He further emphasized that the 1 million drones that he said Ukraine will produce by 2024 will also not be enough to help them prevail over Russia. The European Union pledged to deliver 1 million shells to Ukraine earlier last year, but so far only 300,000 have been delivered.
Where's the rest?
Even Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov, admitted on January 18th that the shortage of ammunition is now an extremely urgent problem for the Ukrainians. But Ukraine's concerns isn't just about the quantity of the drones. In this Business Insider article, it is stated that Ukraine's drones forces are becoming less effective as Russia is getting better at countering the off-the-shelf civilian drones. A Ukrainian drone operator said that Russia improved its jamming and spoofing equipment, making those cheaper drones more likely to fail. So much so that Commander Vitaly Krukov, a loitering munition commander for Ukraine's elite Adam tactical group,
I am a drone operator of Adam Tactic Group.
Said he believes basic drones will soon be obsolete. The effectiveness is dropping as Russia's electromagnetic warfare systems get more powerful, he said. All these factors in favor of Russia has led Chinese state media, the Global Times, to publish this article toward the end of last year. In it, the US Army, which is by far the world's largest military spender, is in a class of its own in terms of losing wars. It says that the US military is now rapidly losing legitimacy relevance, credibility in the eyes of the world outside the US, NATO, and other Western alliances.
What if our foreign policy of the past century is deeply flawed and has not served our national security interests? What if we wake up one day and realize that the terrorist threat is a predictable consequence of our meddling in the affairs of others and has nothing to do with us being free and prosperous? What if propping up repressive regimes in the Middle East endangers both the United States and Israel? What if occupying countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and bombing Pakistan is directly related to the hatred directed toward us?
There comes a time when propaganda and psychological operations or media influencing no longer do the trick. There also comes a time when even the biggest military spender and economy cannot finance its weapons addiction and its arsenals dry up. It's called overextension and diminishing legitimacy in the eyes of others.
And when we came across soldiers, they didn't seem sure of their role.
That child don't need to be here. You know what school is? Okay, that's what he need to be doing, not following you.
We filmed these GIs after they caught a group of Iraqis stealing wood.
We try to stop them from looting, they don't understand, so we'll take their car and we'll crush it. United States Army, tankers, who?
It's called militarism to death and is transforming into imperial decline and eventual collapse. No one is so foolish to believe that in an incredibly diverse world, everybody else would accept one player to be the all-dominating system and shape others into its own image. Missionary times, the article says, is a thing of the past. So enter Ukraine. NATO's promise to help Ukraine for as long as it takes.
For as long as it takes, and that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
We'll do it.
As long as you fight for us, till the last Ukrainian was the motto. Part 1 was the NATO expansion and the wooing of Ukraine, and Part 2 with the proxy war and militarization. And now comes Part 3, says the Global Times, which it dubs the abandonment and the Ukraine being on desolation row to be fixed by a faltering European Union. And here's where the Palestinian conflict comes in handy. The political and media attention on Ukraine has diminished significantly, while Ukraine's counteroffensive has stalled and internal conflicts in Kiev between Zelensky and Zelensky accelerate. Obviously, no one wants to be associated with such a political, economic, military, legal, and moral fiasco as is Ukraine. The EU followed the US blindly and installed the toughest sanctions and completely isolated Russia from Europe. Sweden and Finland willingly let themselves be pushed into NATO for no serious reason.
Членство Финляндии и Швеции в НАТО – это совсем не то, что членство Украины в НАТО. Это совершенно разные вещи.
Now, weapon depots are emptied.
Was that the current rate of ammunition consumption is higher, bigger than the current rate of production.
And the Union is increasingly wobbly politically while undergoing its deepest ever crisis. Germany's economic and political situation looks bleak.
Die deutsche Wirtschaft schrumpft, während andere Volkswirtschaften uns davoneilen. Unter den Industrieländern belegen wir die Schlussgruppe. Die Insolvenzen sind weiter gestiegen. Dann der größte deutsche Solarzellenhersteller wird den Standort in Freiberg schließen. Zudem ist die Innovationsbereitschaft der deutschen Unternehmen auf dem niedrigsten Stand seit 2008.
The Union's knee-jerk reaction to Russia's military operations in Ukraine prevented any analysis of likely consequences in the short, mid, and long term of these measures, which are all considered irrational as they were drastic. Russia, on the other hand, will get out of this quagmire much better than the European Union.
Результат вроде бы нас со всех сторон душат, давят, а мы стали по объему экономики в целом первый в Европе. Мы обогнали ФРГ и заняли 5-е место в мире. Китай, США, Индия, Япония, Россия. в Европе номер один.
And while the West is declining and imploding more with a whimper than with a bang, one scenario for the next decade or so may well contain the fragmentation and possible dissolution of NATO.